So what I'm always looking for is a founder that's willing to tell me the scars and the bad stories. I don't think it's ever been more important to have really, really great implementation and the education that comes along with a lot of these product industries that I'm investing in today, or at least that I'm looking at investing in. A lot of those are tied to the tectonic shifts that actually move the economy. It's more hard hats than hoodies.
Well, Lexi, welcome to Venture Grounds. It's so good to have you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, well, let's kick off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Sound Ventures. We're super excited to learn more.
Sure. So I joined the Sound Ventures team about 2 years ago, and prior was working with a later stage firm. And I'd say the career progression has been going from the latest stages to now some of the earliest stages and kind of doing everything in between. So started off as a founder, and on that side of the table, made my way into an investment banking role and then eventually growth investing. And so I was looking at Series C to pre-IPO, and honestly I was really liking that part of the ecosystem. But what I wanted more of was to be closer to the build. So when I was looking at firms, I had heard of Sound, of course, had heard of Ashton, and his track record is incredible. And so wanted to really be part of that type of platform. And they were thinking about things really differently. This was right on the back of them having invested in OpenAI and Anthropic. They had led a pretty big initiative to really be the index across that space and to take a big swing at the model layer when it wasn't conventional. And so that was something that I really admired about them, had been kind of following, and then joined the team to help with really transitioning our AI strategy to be beyond just the models and really to think about where do we go next, how does this impact a number of different industries, and then how do we actually think about verticals from here.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess maybe just to get a little bit deeper on like how you invest. Obviously, you mentioned your earlier stage. What are your sort of stage focuses, check sizes? Like, what should founders know as they think about looking at Sound as an investor?
So Sound was founded 15 years ago, which I'd say we've been one of the kind of quiet leading firms for a long time, where what we've been doing has been working with founders at the edge and not being very public about it. And it's funny because we come from the background of really helping founders a lot of the time with their own narrative, and a lot of times with helping them to be more in the spotlight and build for an audience, given that's who the founding team, their background is. That said, we, I think now are really, really focused on how can we be leading checks into the best companies and still doing that. So we're primarily leading and co-leading Series A and B. We're doing that in check sizes of anywhere from 5 to 25 million and beyond. And often I'd say that's our core strategy, but we're constantly considering how that might change. So we have things that we're building in kind of areas that we're excited about, and we call those our thematic funds. The AI fund that I mentioned was one of those. There are other areas that we're considering now that could potentially even expand the way that we think about both sector and the way that we think about stage. But for the moment, I'd say that that's the core, and we're looking at companies that are mostly at the AI app layer and are really the category leading companies that we'll think about 10 years from now as being the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Spotifys, the Pinterest of the kind of former era that we invested in.
That's amazing. Well, tell me about one of these, future Spotifys that you've recently invested in. What specifically about that team or founder really got you interested?
So I think one of the internships actually that I had while I was in college was to be the first sales hire, which is kind of a crazy thing to tell a freshman in college to do, but I was the first sales hire at a startup and helped them to basically build what is now their sales process. And at the time I had literally no idea what I was doing, was building in the CRM, and was at the time using HubSpot, but it was early HubSpot days. It was early in kind of the iterations that they were building on CRM. Little did I know that we'd fast forward to today and I'd be investing in the chief product officer who actually led that product at HubSpot. And so Christopher O'Donnell is running a company called Day.ai, which we invested in alongside Sequoia. And that is, I think, just a really, really critical example of what it looks like to have a founder who deeply knows their industry, rethink every assumption that they actually built into the product in the first place. So this is a founder who was chief product officer at the time of HubSpot, actually building the CRM, and is responsible for a lot of what they actually built in that product suite. HubSpot was not doing that before. He kind of helped to bring that to the table. And now he's rebuilding it from the ground up. And he's doing it with an AI nativity that makes it so you don't actually have to update anything in your CRM. It understands what you do. It's native. It really requires zero integration from any of your existing platforms. And everything that he is doing is the exact kind of rebuild of what he had thought of before, because he deeply understands the customer and he understands what they're looking for in this era.
It's amazing. It sounds like the sales team at Roche should maybe check out that product.
Yes, you should.
Yeah, I would love to take a look. Well, that's an investment that you obviously recently did and got excited about. What about, as you see deal flow come through the door, like what are some attributes or even red flags that really get you to sort of pass on a deal that you're sort of commonly seeing?
Often, I think it actually comes down to the founder and the way that we interact. And so when I'm working with a founder and I'm asking them just to tell me about what keeps them up at night, it feels like a really simple question. And it feels like something that, honestly, a politician would tell you not to answer. But what it does is, if you have a founder who has done this before, or you have a founder who really understands the relationship that you can have with the partners that you have around the table, not the one that you're supposed to have, I think those type of founders know that if they can walk you through what keeps them up at night in a really transparent and honest way, they're actually going to get to closer to the right feedback or the right questions that help them to come up with their own answer than they are coming up with a story and telling you a narrative that isn't the reality. So what I'm always looking for is a founder that's willing to tell me the scars and the bad stories and the things that aren't going well. Because if you can't identify those things, you are either lying to yourself or, we're not having as honest conversation as investor and, potential investee. So I think that the kind of founder and the way that they deal with hard problems is a big piece that I will look for. Beyond that, it's having just an understanding of your customer. I want to know that you understand where your product comes into the customer's day-to-day on almost like a minute-to-minute basis. If you deeply understand the workflows, and not just like at a high level, you have spent so much time with your customer that you have more than just empathy for their problem. It feels like you've been in their shoes. And in many cases, actually, a lot of the founders that I'm investing in have been in their customer's shoes. That type of empathy can't be taught. And I think that that's something that I'm looking for, and I'm looking for the counter signal of if they don't have a really deep understanding of what their customers' pain points are, and they can't articulate that into the ways that they're building product.
Yeah, makes sense. How do you, I feel like I've come across a lot more young founders, maybe folks who are dropping out of college to start their first businesses, and maybe are like building in spaces they haven't necessarily worked in before. Has Sound made many bets with sort of the younger founder audience, or how do you think about folks with that kind of persona?
We have, and I think it's been part of our history for a long time, is still part of the way that we think today. What I'm looking for is a founder who's willing to rethink their own assumptions, and whether that means they were a former founder and built in the same space like Chris at Day, or whether they are somebody who is young, hungry, has spent the time and done the work to actually understand their space very deeply before developing a solution for it. They have a really core understanding of the problem. Like we invested in a company called Warp, and I think that is a perfect example of a founder that has gone and deeply understood the market, despite never having been in the seat of having to deal with his own payroll issues necessarily. So I think that that's something that we're always looking for, is like, how, if you don't have the experience, how do you go and solve for that? And how do you go and try to learn and gather insight before you actually start the company? And then how do you influence the decisions on how you actually build product from there? The way that we find out about it through customers is also important. We spend a lot of time with customers asking them, what was every piece of the interaction with the company like? What were the parts of of your problems that they understood? What are some of the pieces of feedback that the customers have given you? We asked the founders this, that customers have given you that you disagreed with, and what did you do with that? If you are hearing patterned feedback across your customers that a feature doesn't work or that they want something desperately in the product, and you're not incorporating that feedback, either you have really great product intuition, and there is something to be said for a founder that goes against what customers want now because he knows that what they'll need later. But there's also something to be said for a founder who can really take feedback and incorporate it because they already knew that that was a need before the founder or before the customers even had to surface it. So I think that that's something we're kind of asking customers about, and also asking founders how they think about customer feedback and the reasons for people actually using the product and some of the things they see.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Sort of along those lines, obviously in the age of AI, the common refrain is that it seems that product moat is trending toward zero. This product intuition maybe is one example of a way that a founder can build something that's differentiated in the market. But beyond that, how are you addressing kind of these concerns around product moats and moats in general? What do you think are the most durable ways to build businesses in this new era?
It's not an unpopular opinion that I have here, but I honestly don't think that there's much of a technical moat for a lot of the products that we look at today. There are pieces of an individual product and an experience that comes with that product that can still be a moat. And that is, I think, around the things that don't scale in the early days, like customer support, the way that you operationally are working to implement with a customer. I don't think it's ever been more important to have really, really great implementation and the education that comes along with a lot of these products. Otherwise, you end up in like the classic Spider-Man meme, which is, I have a product, you have a wallet to buy it, but neither of us knows what the product should be used for. And it's just a back and forth of asking, how should I use this? And it's how would you want to use this? That can be easily avoided, I think, when you have a really great implementation strategy. And a lot of that comes down to the forward deployed engineers that we're seeing. Even some of that is forward deployed service, where people are actually just sending their teams in to educate around use case. That's something that I think is still part of the product, but isn't necessarily a technical moat. On top of that, it's distribution. Like really, there's no better moat than an emotional one, and you have to have an emotional tie with your customers. And I do think that having the right people around the table, both on the team, it's never been more important to have a great growth lead, but also having the right people around the table from an investment standpoint who really deeply understand how to help you distribute. It's not just the intro. It's not just the, opening the doors to these customers. It's helping you to craft the narrative and literally sitting there in the trenches with you as you're thinking about the story, how it's going to resonate with every stakeholder, whether it's a customer, whether it's an investor, whether it's a potential hire. But the story building, I think, is the lost piece that those that can crack it are winning hand over fist in this market because they've cracked distribution more than anyone else.
And how are they cracking distribution in a different way?
What I really like about this era is that there's been a transition of B2B companies thinking like B2C companies and taking some of the creative hacks that we would traditionally have used in the consumer investments that we made a decade ago. We now get to actually play around with the creativity of doing that for B2B. And it comes into the form of like really creative out of home. And it's not necessarily like a, mind-blowing strategy, but you see a lot of companies that are taking a really creative approach to get in front of their customer. And I think it extends beyond just the actual marketing in the day-to-day. It's in the narrative, how they build it, how they're actually speaking to their customer, how they're amplifying their customer. A lot of these B2B companies, I think actually Ro's a great example of this. A lot of B2B companies are elevating their customer, and in doing so are elevating themselves. And I think that's been a creative tactic that they've been using quite a bit. And we've seen it just be a net amplifier for the entire industry. And often a lot of companies that are going more horizontal get to focus on different use cases, and they elevate the customers in that, and those customers become your champion for a long time. So it's the things that don't scale. It's the, Unreasonable Hospitality, by the way, great book, and I would recommend it to any founder. I'd give it to every founder. I think of the small gestures that really make a lasting impact on your customer And ultimately, building a culture that delights the customer means that that carries into distribution. And it goes a number of different ways depending on the company. But I've loved the creativity we've seen so far.
Amazing. What about creativity in some of these unsexy parts of the economy that you're investing in? I'd love to learn more about, that particular focus area of yours and how you see that world as somewhat different in terms of your investment approach.
Yeah. So it's probably helpful to give an explanation as to where that comes from, because when you look at sound, it doesn't make that much sense to think about us as going after these like critical industries in some of the areas where I'm spending time now. But my background is that my stepdad had a World War I and World War II aviation museum that's third generation. And so I grew up working and building planes and flying planes as part of that. And then my mom is a custom home builder. So I grew up on the job site. And so when you look at those two things, and then I look at a lot of the industries that I'm investing in today, or at least that I'm looking at investing in, a lot of those are tied to the tectonic shifts that actually move the economy. And it's more hard hats than hoodies in a lot of cases, where you're looking at a lot of people who actually have boots on the ground, are building for the physical constraints of what we're going to need over the next 10 years, 20 years and beyond. And I think that those are the industries where, even though they're boring or they're archaic, and this is like aerospace, manufacturing, construction, energy, they might be boring on the outside. They are some of the largest industries, if not the largest industries in the economy, and are ultimately going to be those that see the most impact from this shift. And I think that that's actually what's interested me the most about it is, we work with a lot of different verticals, and it's always been something that I'm generalist, but I like to spend a lot of time kind of getting deep in a specific vertical at a given time. And it's hard to find some, things these days where AI can make an exponential difference. There are places where it can make an incremental, and it's 10%, 5%, 20% productivity improvement. But if you're coming from pen and paper, if you're coming from a process that is entirely manual with labor shortages and with all of the kind of blue collar, infrastructural issues that we see across a lot of these different sectors, there is going to be a massive, massive shift. And what that moves, when it moves, is going to make, the dollars invested an exponential difference relative to what I'm seeing across different industries.
Yeah. So we're super aligned on that. I think I've been very personally interested as well in kind of, the industrial manufacturing, like these historically tech neglected sectors, and also in other parts of the world. But I won't get into that. I do think this has become increasingly consensus over time. And I hope that it continues to become more consensus because it's a very important sector. What are some other areas where you feel like you're uniquely contrarian, but right?
AI for services is actually a place where I'm spending a lot of time, and it's AI-enabled services is the way that I would frame it. But we, as venture investors, have basically had this dogma that services are out. And you can't have any businesses that have services because it's lower margin, it's lower impact, often lower multiple. There's a lot of reasons why services industries haven't been top of mind for venture for the last couple of decades. That said, I think this is the era for us to rethink that. And if you look at AI today and you 100% believe that everything that we do will be replaced and there won't be a need for a human in the loop, and you're assuming that there will be a full convergence, then we probably disagree. I think I see a world where there is some convergence, but there is more of a parallel path and we work together than there is a full mutual exclusiveness. And so that's something that I think is driving this thesis. There's a lot of businesses that are building across cybersecurity, across operations, across market research, that are really investing in the people and how do we increase the potential of the people, and how do we actually make somebody incrementally, if not exponentially, again, better at their job and what they currently do, so that they can elevate their own capabilities. And then ultimately that's what up levels the productivity of an organization. It's not the full replacement, it's augmentation. And I think there are certain industries where that is especially relevant. And those are the spaces where I'm spending time, there's a lot of places where I think the market is just frankly ignoring what I think is the more likely possibility, because we're all very excited about a future of autonomy and a full future of replacement. But we have to remember that the human side of things means that we're going to want to be in the driver's seat for a lot longer than I think we're all willing to admit.
Yeah. Quick follow-up on that. Do you see the opportunity within AI services as a sort of ground-up approach, or do you think there's an opportunity for, obviously roll-ups, I think, have become popular again, as a way to kind of invest in that kind of a business around efficiency? Do you have a preference?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's really, really hard to redefine a foundation if, it starts in archaic roots. And so if you are doing a roll-up strategy, you need a very talented team, both on the financial engineering side of things, but also on the nuts and bolts of what they're actually building from an AI perspective. And then most importantly, you need the continuity of the customer understanding. So it all comes back to what I was saying earlier about having this deep empathy for the customer, this deep understanding of how the industry works as it is today. And a lot of what I think these roll-up strategies are missing is that they lose the original team and they lose all of the institutional knowledge, the relationships. Honestly, a lot of it is still tribal knowledge that's passed down throughout an organization and passed in between customer and the ultimate, platform or whatever that ends up looking like once it's rolled up. And so I think that they're losing a lot of the customer piece and they're losing a lot of the actual nuts and bolts of what make the business work and not the technology. Yeah. And so the two need to be a kind of a melded pair. So sometimes it is actually better when a company is started with AI nativity from day one, because you're building out a services or an agency or a SOC that is ultimately going to be AI native from the beginning, and you're not just changing the scaffolding along the way and doing a lot more of the retrofitting of a business.
Yeah, makes sense. We're going to go into the espresso round, which means fast responses to quick questions. Perfect. What's one view you hold about the market that most investors would disagree with?
I think that, honestly, the boring physical world industries are going to be the investments that we should be spending time on over the next 20 years.
Sick. What's one sort of thesis or area of conviction that you've completely rethought in the last year?
It's mostly actually been around team and pattern recognition. And so I think the way that I think about how companies should be built is really about breaking patterns instead of creating them now. And I'm seeing different team structures, different org structures, different entire paradigms of the way that people are building and creating their cultures than we've ever seen before. So I don't think pattern recognition works anymore in that way.
What is the risk that most of venture is sleepwalking past right now?
100%. The biggest challenge that we are going to have in the next 10 years and beyond is energy. And if venture investors are not thinking about the power gap right now, they are missing the mark.
No fusion?
It's part of it. It's power generation, power enablement, and basically everything that helps us to be able to meet the needs of data centers from here.
Cool. Who's a company, founder, or sector you're fascinated by at the moment?
Well, I'd say actually on that, it would be more so the fission side of things. And I've been really excited about what I'm seeing in SMRs. And a lot of these that are taking kind of the physics that we know and are applying the production processes and manufacturing processes that are actually going to make this baseload power co-located and available in shorter timelines than we've seen ever before.
Cool. What's a founder red flag that's actually a green flag?
When they say, I don't know. I love when a founder tells me I don't know, because it just means they're honest.
Sweet. What do founders consistently get wrong about what VCs actually do?
Honestly, I think everybody gets wrong about the relationship between a VC and a founder. How much of it is just about the human connection? And if a founder thinks one thing about VCs, it's that we are the type of people who should be your first call on a Saturday night. We should be your first call on a Monday morning, the in between. And I think it's really that you want somebody who is around the table for every moment and is actually going to be the best sounding board, asking the right questions and helping you to determine the right answer. Anybody who tries to tell you what to do, I think, is ultimately doing more than what their role would suggest. Our role is to put founders in the best position.
Well, Lexi, thank you so much for your time today. I learned a lot, and we really enjoyed having you on the pod.
Thank you. Great to see you.